I come from a production background originally. I trained as a stage manager. I went back to uni, did a business degree. I've worked for presenting organisations, producing organisations in advocacy. So I don't have a particular bent in terms of the position that I come from when I talk to you today. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. For those of you who don't know, the Australia Council have done a study reasonably recently, and they say that the percentage of Indigenous work on our stages across the country sits at about 2%, which is a pretty sad state of affairs, and I will leave that with you at that level. The following presentation does contain a bit of strong language and marketing themes, but it is not a marketing presentation. I have the luxury of having a marketing degree, but having never had to work as a marketer. And it's interesting that I've never taken a job as a marketing manager or a marketing director. Having said that, I've never been offered one either. But much of what I do in advocacy, in capacity building, in producing, presenting, programming, is about marketing. Not about sales, but it is about marketing. Or if I was to go one further, I would say that it's about strategic marketing, and to go one further step still, strategic planning with a marketing bent. My sense is that if art is about communication, and I do believe that it is, then who we communicate with, how or if the audience responds, and how many people we touch is vitally important. I'm quite the romantic when it comes to audience development. As Henry said, it is close to my heart, and that's kind of where that title came from. But for anybody who's actually at the coalface of this, and I see Nancy and a couple of other people who are actually having to sell tickets on a daily basis, it could be a little bit frustrating that I'm taking a sort of broader, slightly philosophical view. Anyway, so this slide says there are some people who would never have fallen in love if they hadn't heard there was such a thing. And I'll kind of begin and end with this because it's about the idea that people don't necessarily know what's available or what they might need, sometimes what they want. But it's a bigger conversation in terms of audience development, and I'll come back to it. There's an idealism and a beauty to the idea or the theory of audience development that drives me. It's almost cause-related, to the extent that sometimes I feel like a bit of a missionary in all the good kind of connotations of that word. And people like Alan Brown and Diane Ragsdale and John Nell, and books like this, if you haven't read it, read it. It's called Counting New Beans. Are like a Bible. And it pretty much comes from this. If you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got. A whole bunch of people have said that. I usually put it up as anonymous because I don't actually know who said it first, but I thought I'd credit everybody. This is my approach, my shared understanding. The people in my organisation know where I'm coming from when I talk about audience development. And when I say my organisation, I say the three of us. And that's by and large what we try to communicate with the people that we're dealing with. But first, question one. Is audience development predominantly a marketing problem? And I just want to ask, I'm going to take this with me. I just want to ask everybody in the room, do you think it's a marketing problem? Put up your hand. Oh my God, this is great. So do you think it's not a marketing problem? Or and a whole bunch of people don't know, or they're not brave enough to say, which is totally fine.
I would say it's not.
It's not a marketing problem. Great. Why do you say that?
Because I think it's...
Sorry, Mary just said she thinks it's not a marketing problem.
I don't think it's a marketing problem because I think audience development is something that starts in our homes, basically, and as a cultural thing, to be honest. So it's bigger than marketing.
You will have a more definite position on this by the time we finish, I guarantee. thanks for that, and I'll give you my opinion on it later. But firstly, let's go through a bit about what we're going to talk about today. I'll give you a bit of a definition, talk about what it is, what it isn't. I'll talk about a process of audience development, an approach to audience development. We'll talk about some models of market development, talk about how important research is in this process. We'll take a break. And then Guy will give you the nitty-gritty around the reality of it after I've given you some theory. There'll be questions after that, and then we'll do drinks. Actually, I'm going to come back to that. Over the next hour, we're not going to talk about, certainly I'm not going to talk about, tactics for selling tickets. So if you are here to find out how to sell tickets, you might just want to grab a drink and then hang around later for Guy's bit. He will give you a lot more information as far as that's concerned. But I am going to tell you why, or at least I'm going to attempt to explain why you would do audience development. And as I said, a little bit later, Guy will talk to us about the case study down there. I'm going to start with this though. So this is a slightly different version, but the guts of it is the same, of Mandurah Performing Arts' purpose. From Fresh to Salt, Mandurah Performing Arts Centre exists to celebrate and share arts and cultural experiences, to unite our community and to make Mandurah a great place to live. A great place to live. I think this is critically important because we often jump past why. And I expect it's a source of quite a bit of grief between departments within organisations or individuals in organisations because they're not aligned on why. Why is important, but I want to talk about what exactly we're going to be talking about today in terms of audience development, because it does get confused with a lot of other terms. And this is a definition that the Scottish Arts Council created in 2008. And of all the definitions that I've looked at in probably the last 15 years, this is probably the best. It's a planned and targeted management process which involves programming, education and marketing, underpinned by research and evaluation, working together to deliver an organisation's overall objectives and which are relevant to the communities of interest they serve. So a planned and targeted management process. What it is not, but it still kind of is audience engagement, which is a different thing, or community engagement, again a different thing, or activation. We talk about activating spaces, again slightly different. There'll be crossover, but again a different thing. Access is another thing that we talk about, but again a slightly different thing, and there is crossover between all of these things. The point there is that there is a different definition for each of those things, and they each have a different purpose. A lot of crossover here, and I'll come to those purposes around audience development. Actually, I'll touch on it now. So this is from an arts centre point of view. Increase attendance, easy. Increase attendance, that's generally what people think. Cultural growth in the community is supported as a result. Revenue is increased. Audiences' understanding of an art form or work is developed. People are introduced to new art forms, and perceived risk of involvement in arts activity is diminished. Do you get why I'm not talking about selling tickets? It's a much bigger and a slightly different conversation. So at the core of audience development is about these three things. It's about more people buying more tickets. It's about different people buying tickets, and it's about a deeper connection with people that are already buying tickets or going to a gallery or whatever the other arts project might be. So more ticket sales, sure, but my argument is that you actually want to make it easier for them to buy tickets or easier to sell tickets for yourself. So it's not about the act of selling tickets, it's about laying a foundation. And I just want to talk about two examples, one small and one large. Annette Carmichael is a choreographer, dance maker based in Denmark in the southwest of Western Australia. We've been doing workshops all across the state in kind of producing work with art centres and local government. Every time we get to this point where we talk about the statement where we say you need to educate and train your audience, and it's something that came from feedback from those regional communities. And it really grates on Annette as an arts maker, you know, that language that you have to educate and train your audience. And the language does grate for me a little bit as well. But I would argue that she's been making work down in that community for almost 10 years now. Similar kind of style of work. It's contemporary dance. She works with community. They have learnt or created an expectation around the style of work that she creates. They have a familiarity with it. And so the last project that she did at the end of last year, she had literally people confronting her in the street saying, "Can I get a ticket?" And she was like, "No, I'm sorry, we're sold out. We cannot fit anybody else in." You know, it's a great position to be in. And my sense is that that consistency of delivery over time is what has developed that audience. At the other end of the scale, let's talk about Perth Festival. I would argue that over the course of Wendy Martin's 3 festivals, we've seen a bit of a shift in the acceptance of the style of work that the festival's presenting. Possibly the same with any festival director. In fact, just last week I was speaking with a reasonably senior bureaucrat who said, you know, they always nail it in their 3rd go. I don't know whether that's true or not. But the question is it the programming? I don't know. Is it the audience? Has the audience matured over that time as well? Is it the marketing? Did they just really nail the marketing? Or is it the case of all 3 kind of getting on the same page and getting in that groove? I actually don't have that answer. And someone much smarter than me probably could give you that answer. I don't know if Michael Chappell's actually in the room, but he did their last lot of audience research and he probably does have the answer. But I would almost guarantee that it took 3 years to lay a foundation for audiences to understand and be familiar with an expectation of what they are going to receive. So, another fan of mine, Alain de Botton, says, "We fall in love with those of us who care for us in familiar ways. And audience development is no different. Our audiences seek ways to be nurtured and fulfilled in ways that resonate with them and that are relevant to them. Rightly or wrongly, this is very much related to what Alan Brown refers to as a readiness to receive. He talks about it slightly more in terms of impact rather than just developing audiences in terms of numbers. But I'd contend that it's also very much about audience development. And Alan says, the way you describe your programs plays a pivotal role in shaping expectations of value and therefore people's readiness to receive the art and ultimately its impact. So there's a messaging thing there around the way you describe your program, but the key thing there is about creating expectation with those people about what they are going to see. If they think they are going to see something that is going to be good, their outcome in terms of actually having a good time is higher. They've done a study on that. And this all leads me to this notion of audience development as a process or a system, and particularly as a value-based cycle. So basically what we're talking about here is you've got inputs in terms of, you know, the show, the creative team, the maker, the artist. You've got outputs in terms of the show that actually ends up on the stage, you're selling tickets, the gallery's hung, the exhibition, etc. What are the outcomes as a result of those 2 things? Generally, we can't determine them beforehand. We can think we know what they are, but we don't know because it hasn't happened yet. And then translating those outcomes into value is the next hardest thing, which is a critical thing around measurement. And then once you've created the value, then obviously you've got more input, more output. You know, it's that kind of cycle. If you're not thinking about those outcomes, if you're not creating value, it tends to be a downward spiral. If you're able to articulate those outcomes and able to articulate the value, it's an upward spiral, I would contend. So input, output kind of unknown, you know, particularly with the creation of a new work, and outcome, really no idea. Well, that's not strictly true. You will know the desired outcome, but you won't know the actual outcome. And again, this comes back to this idea of readiness to receive. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario. So this is where there's a bit of a challenge around developing audiences for an undefined outcome. And it's because that outcome is unclear that we focus on inputs and outputs rather than outcomes and value. you get me? So we do the thing that we can kind of touch and feel that is knowable. There's a statement, and I'm going to get it wrong now, but we manage what we measure. And if we're not measuring outcomes and value, then it's a much harder thing to manage. So let's talk about process. An approach-based process to audience development. I'm talking about this stuff and this stuff. I'm not really talking about this stuff and this stuff. So Guy will talk about the projects and tactics a little bit more, but very much from a shared approach and a strategy point of view. My argument is that there's almost no point doing this level stuff if you're not doing this level stuff. Your board and your executive team totally need to get on board as far as a shared approach, a shared understanding, common understanding. This is why we are here. This is what we are going to do. Organisation-wide, definitely a strategic approach. There's a flow down there. Are we all on the same page from an organisation point of view? Teams are going to develop these projects, programming, producing, marketing, development, and hopefully crossover between those teams. So you see where I'm going here. And then individuals are going to look after tactics. So it's this kind of upward but still broad view that ultimately delivers the tactics. The bit that's really important here, and it's just the fact of life, all of this stuff needs money. WAM, West Australian Music, have just written an audience development strategy. Great document, really clear, a lot of research, spoke to the right people, come up with a great plan. They need money to write it, they need money to deliver it. And critical to that is the fact that they need an individual in that organisation, I think they're talking 2 days a week, to actually deliver that strategy. And it's a key part of what happened down in Mandurah as well. And Guy will talk about that a bit later. So let's talk briefly about getting the challenge of getting on the same page. I was recently down in Narrogin talking with their Arts Council. I can't remember the name of them. Arts Narrogin. Oh, there we go. Who'd have thought? They're mounting a production that's touring around the place at the moment called Heart. One-man show by an Indigenous guy about his story growing up in Western Australia. Yeah. Difficult piece for them to present in that context, I would say. Good on them for taking the risk, for raising that issue, for putting that stuff into their program. The image that they got from the producing company, or independent producer actually, was not something that they thought resonated with their audience. But they didn't have the ability, for whatever reason, to change that image. My issue there is that those people in that community, those people in that arts organisation in that community know that community quite well, hopefully. A whole lot better than the organisation that's produced that work, more than likely. But the inability for them to get on the same page, and I'm talking about different organisations here, but to get on the same page and say, well, this is actually what we're trying to achieve with this audience, meant that there was a bit of a disconnect there, and I think that they could have achieved a lot more had they been able to get on the same page. Recently, this work that I've done for Circuit West with local government, where we're writing a guide to help them get the most out of their arts centres, help them get the most out of their arts centres, it was really interesting because part of that was that we are arguing to find a common language in order to be better understood. So less binary. And it relates to this. So if you imagine this being a spectrum and artists and art being at that end, very much arts for art's sake. This is a personal, something I've put my blood, sweat and tears into, etc. Local government being at this end, which is typically more economically constrained. And we talked about that for a bit, being local government being economic rationalists, and the consultant that I'm working with said, no, local government don't make economically rational decisions at all. So it changed the conversation. But the big point here is that the meeting point is in community benefit. I would be very surprised if there is any artist that makes a work that isn't wanting to have some impact on the community. It's a very comfortable place for them to go. And the community development objectives around local government tend to be exactly the same thing. So it's a really easy place to get on the same page. If the artists talk to local government saying, I want to do this arts project, possibly not as receptive as to, I want to work on your youth development strategy. And, by the way, here's an arts project that I've got to deliver it. The irony was that we titled that paper, when we originally titled that paper, it was, a guide for local government to get the most out of their arts centres. If you only understood us, you would get so much more out of your arts centre. And my guess was that their response was, who cares? The building's there anyway. I've employed the staff, whether 10 shows happen there or 50 shows happen there. And I'm being overly critical. But then what we realised when we actually kind of went through that process and tried to listen to ourselves was that we changed the name of that guide, and we've now called it a Local Government Guide to Growing Community Wellbeing Through the Performing Arts. Absolutely nothing has changed in the content of that guide. Absolutely nothing, other than the title. And we've tweaked the aim a little bit. There's a Stephen Covey quote that says, "Seek first to understand, then to be understood." It's a hard lesson to learn, and hopefully it's something that we've kind of built on through this model. But first I want to expand some more on the issue of value, and this brings me to an architecture of value and this sense of getting to social inclusion or social cohesion. This is about a long-term approach to audience development and long-term programming to achieve long-term goals. This was in the paper that I sent out. If you haven't read it, totally fine. This is by a guy called Alan Brown, bit of a legend in my mind. He talks about the individual arts experience. This is you sitting in the auditorium watching a show. It might be a fantastic show, might not be groundbreaking. There's actually Jeroen Lifshitz from Circa talks about that moment when you're sitting in the auditorium and the lights go down and there's this sense of anticipation and the curtain goes up in 3 minutes and you go, oh fuck, I've wasted another 2 hours of my life. It's horses for courses depending on your experience. But ideally in this arts experience there's a sense of captivation, a sense of flow, a sense of spirituality, there's some sense of connection or some sense of transformation, entertainment, social bonding, that sort of stuff. And then things happen with more people, social breadth, and over more time. So here is the ripple kind of effect. And this is where it goes. So, in the individual and enduring, there's a little star moment down here, the imprint of the arts experience. I've got an individual experience, I was there, I enjoyed it, I didn't, whatever. Had a great time, didn't have a great time. Over time, as an individual, the more stuff I see, and I think about this now, having been seeing shows for 30 years, what have I learned as a result? So how has 30 years of going to arts performances affected me from a personal development point of view? And we tend not to think about that when we're sitting in the moment. Also, what's happened as I've done that with more people? When I talk about this in other contexts, we talk about going to a cafe and having a cup of coffee. You can go and have a cup of coffee on your own. You sit in a cafe, might read your phone, might read a magazine, quite an insular experience. Good coffee, bad coffee, whatever. You can go with a friend and you'll probably have a conversation. You'll have a dialogue, there'll be some human interaction, and there's a bit more in the offer there. You do that over time, you bring a whole bunch of people into that cafe, you do a monthly book club or something with a whole group of people, and you're really heading out to that cluster. This is what Alan Brown calls them, in terms of economic and social benefits. So I'm sorry this is so small. So that cluster talks about civic pride, social capital, economic impact, harm avoidance, things like lower drop-off rates. I was up in Roebourne late last year, and there was a person from the Indigenous Cultural Centre there who said they spoke with the policeman whenever there is a function on, an event on, in their cultural centre, zero crime in the city, in the town. It is a direct correlation, not rocket science. Developing tolerance and understanding, community engagement, stewardship, larger social networks. So in terms of value, You've got your individual personal experience, but communicating that value in terms of outcomes, much bigger conversation to be had. So critical to that question is, how do we measure that stuff? And it's been something that's been on the cards for a while now. In 2010, we ran an annual conference. I was looking for a speaker on measuring impact. Almost impossible to find. What's that, 8 years ago? 8 years later, the world is awash with people on impact assessment, and it's actually quite a confusing space to work in because people do it in different ways. And is Michael here? No. Okay, right. Great. Well, I can talk about culture counts without him here. Measurable outcomes of cultural activity. This is a culture count source that's been developed with input from the Cultural Development Network. Basically, these 5 dimensions: civic, economic, place, cultural and social outcomes of cultural activity, and then the flow and effects of those things. At the moment, we're focusing predominantly on civic and social stuff. Cultural assessment is great for funders and for artists. Local government, not so excited. But things like community belonging, citizenship, collaboration, mental and physical health, well-being, wow, geez, that really ticks boxes. Part of what we took this model, if you like. One of the things that we do with our organisation is measure people's box office and attendance. And we wanted to try and mash the two together, and we tried to pilot a project in Mandurah to do this. These are the dimensions that we measured with audiences that saw 3 different shows. Aesthetic experience, innovation. This is about the art stuff. I love the arts, but that's not what we were really interested in. Did people feel safe and welcome? Did they feel part of the community as a result? Did it help me enjoy a greater quality of life? Those sorts of things. It helped me to better understand the place and the people in where I live. So we measured these things via an app, iPad kind of thing. Yeah. Post-show, across 3 different shows. Guy can probably talk to this a lot better than me. But essentially 3 different types of shows. These drummers from Japan, was it buy-in?
It was a hire.
It was a hire, okay. David Strasman, ventriloquist, Morning Melodies. 3 very different pieces of work. The facts aren't that interesting at this point, but I'm going to talk about the concept. We looked at attendance, the investment in there, the operating surplus or deficit as a result, each of those shows. And then measured these things around safety, belonging, well-being, understanding across those 3 different shows. Unfortunately, it didn't show anything fantastic. It was a small sample, but I'll take you through it. For example, belonging, the Morning Melody show rated just as high as the Strassman show, and people felt a little less belonging with the Drummers of Japan. Conversely, in terms of safety, for some reason they felt safer with the Drummers of Japan, and they did it. Morning Melodies, go figure. The fact of the matter is that is a model that we've just piloted. We're kind of prototyping it. And the reason why I bring it to you is not because of the outcome, but because of the way we need to change our assessment of what we do and how we measure it. So, this smart guy called Michael Sandel, and some of you might know him. He says that we've drifted from having a market economy to becoming a market society. A market economy is a tool. It's most commonly used just for selling goods and services in a commercial world. A market society is a place where almost everything is up for sale. So as marketers or as programmers or even as managers, can we change the attitudes and behaviours of the market to accept the offer rather than change the offer for the market? Got that? Change the behaviours of the market to accept the offer rather than change the offer for the market. And I've got to read this quote, bit of a hero of mine. If one adheres to the doctrine that multiple perspectives on social issues are useful in a democratic society, even though they might be in conflict with the prevailing popular sentiment and social norms, the freedom of expression exemplified by self-oriented creativity is a social asset. If consumers are only presented with what they want or will readily accept, then the potential for social change and intellectual diversity is greatly curtailed. We should not attempt to reconstruct the product to suit the marketing assumptions. Rather, the marketing concepts and technologies should be modified to fit their essence. This is where we get to the point and we say audience development is not a marketing problem, it's a programming one. And that's Alan's view. I think it's a broader problem than that even still. But programming is definitely at the core. This is a model of market expansion. Classic kind of just commercial model. Yeah, not arts related. Basically, you can sell the same product to new people, sell the same product to the same people more often, sell new stuff to the same people or new stuff to new people. Really expensive, really hard. This is how that translates in an audience development context. Product development, maximising current audiences, increasing similar audiences, and diversifying your offer. I'm pretty sure this was in the material I sent out. If it wasn't, I will make sure that you get it. It's very much at the tactic level. It's probably the stuff that you're most interested in now, but it's not something that I'm going to talk about. What I am going to talk about is segmentation very briefly. This is also in the material that I sent out, and I just want to make one really important point about this. So there's a study done, statistically significant. What is the potential of cultural consumers in Australia, done by the Australia Council? And they're defined according to these different segments: essence, expression, affirmation, enrichment, stimulation, release, perspective, and entertainment. I don't know if you can see that up from back, but entertainment, the entertainment seekers that make up the proportion of our cultural buyers, 9%. And release, 12%. I would say they're your kind of main entertainment, popular consumers. The rest are all after something much deeper, much more meaningful. What I propose is that we try to create a crush on the arts. Again, Alan Botton says a crush is an instantaneous certainty of the location of the ideal. And I would love that. If we got to a place where people thought about the arts as being an instant certainty of an ideal. He then goes on to say, quite appropriately for an arts context, that it involves projection and self-deception, and Freud talks about it as a psychosis. So from that point of view, welcome to my psychosis. But just before we break and wrap up, I want to come back to this. The easiest people to fall in love with are those about whom we know nothing. The easiest people to fall in love with are those about whom we know nothing. Maybe this could be the starting point from where you go from here. Find out about those people, about whom we know nothing. And give those who know nothing about us a really warm welcome. For me, it speaks to that notion of risk and that idea of if we always do what we always did, we always get what we always got. So just in summary, remember, we're not chasing the low-hanging fruit. That's important in some aspects. It's important in terms of ticket sales. It will balance the rest of the program for sure, but it's not the core thing. It's about a holistic, long-term approach. It's about more, deeper, and different. It's about building value and using the right language, and that it's not just a marketing problem. Ultimately, it's about taking risks and about leading our audiences, and I hope that's what you'll take away from today. Thanks.
First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners. First of the land on which the Mandurah Performing Arts Centre sits, the Mandurah people, and of course acknowledging the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and the land on which we're standing at the moment. Also acknowledging the Chamber for hosting this presentation, Rick for asking me to deliver this corollary to his rant, and but also acknowledging that we're country cousins down in Mandurah and we've come up here en masse. So Ellie, Helena, Sally and Mary are here with me to give me support and will be available, I'm sure. And of course Kelly, who works with us as well. So the title, Mandurah Performing Arts Centre Contemporary Dance Program, or pirouetting to the beat in the real world of building audiences. First of all, I'm a programmer. So I need to kind of nail my shingle to that wall. I approach this from a programming perspective. But of course, when you program, any programmer with real heart can program almost anything depending on the brief. So therefore, then it begs the question, if you're programming, are you programming for yourself? Well, or are you programming for your audience? So then the question becomes, who is your audience? I'm sure most of you know the Mandurah Performing Arts Centre and know our community. How many of you have seen a show down there? Oh, good numbers, great, good on you. The history. The Performing Arts Centre, lovely smoky picture, with no one in sight. Gorgeous, beloved building, and we've set about changing that. It was built in 1997, so we had our 20th birthday last year, and it was built when Mandurah was around about 37,500 people and was not connected solidly as it is now via train line freeway. It was not a commuter belt town. It was an adventurous thing to build a centre of this size in that community at that time. And I really believe it's 21 years later, it really shows the foresight of that building in the very first place. It was built close to the site of the original Peninsula Hotel, which was beloved of Mandurah. And we've tried to carry on some of that, bear some of that in forward. It was obviously, when it was first built, Mandurah was solidly a holiday town. It was no longer the fishing village that it was established to be. And it has now become, in a sense, bolted on to Perth, although the city of Mandurah wouldn't like hearing me say that. It has become part of a peri-urban commuter belt that goes from, Canning Bridge, further down, Coburn Central, all the way down to Mandurah. And those new commuter suburbs that are being built up between Perth and Mandurah are changing the demographics of our catchment. Our core catchment is we view 250,000 people. So Mandurah is a city at the moment of 85,000 people that swells up to 125,000 people over holiday weekends. But part of our core catchment is also the city of Rockingham, and to a lesser extent the wider Peel region. So that's kind of interesting. Our demographics, well, we've got more retirees than any other local government authority in Mandurah in the country. We had more FIFO worker families than any other local government authority in the country. We've got the third highest youth unemployment rate in the country. We've got a higher than average 0 to 18. So people like to bring up their family in a place like Mandurah. So if your choice is you want to go south of the river and you can't afford South Perth, you might like to consider Mandurah because we've got facilities. So the demographics are changing. Kind of raise that for context because you got to know your audience, don't you? But do we really know our audience? That's the question. Obviously, my arrival, I was engaged to develop a program. So after, I don't know, how many years was it? 11 or so years, 13 years, the centre really decided that what it needed was not a venue manager but a programmer. And came in, and the team have really supported me in that development. It's been, I have to say, a journey of discovery from the notion, if we bring it, they will come, to an audience development driven approach. And this is a journey, really. I have to say that we've still got some way to go. In between that, my arrival, winning the Drovers Award in 2013, realising that just presenting Bell Shakespeare or Sydney Dance Company wasn't enough, that we actually needed to understand where our audience was going to come from for those shows and go out and find them and talk to them. I had a pivotal moment at an APACA conference in Hobart with David Fischel, and it wasn't the quality of that, but it was his really introducing the Centre for the Art movement. So as opposed to the Receiving House movement, and we do have a gallery, so I have to hesitate about pushing the performing arts too much, but that Centre of the Arts approach was key. And then at the Artsland conference in Dubbo, with a man called Skinder Hundal, who programmed the New Arts Exchange in Nottingham, and his view that he programmed his centre, which was a very high East Asian content for that community in Nottingham, as if his community was at the centre of the universe. And again, that was another pivotal moment. That, believe it or not, I'm sure you all know, but Mandurah is at the centre of the universe. So that led us to our vision, and we've dropped. Sorry, Rick, we've dropped Fresh to Salt. There's a story that goes with Fresh to Salt, which is rather lovely. But we do exist, and we are to unite our community and to make Mandurah a great place to live. And we do that by our peak program, our first goal. And we've recently redefined what peak program is. And we've redefined that to also incorporate the works that we are creating in our community. They are part of our view. It's from Sydney Dance Company to Maxima, to Pulse, to Riptide. So those parts of our program that are responding to our community are as important part to our peak program as the work of WASO. And there you've got Sydney Dance Company's Countermove. That engagement and outreach are really particularly important. Our journey on engagement started with Annette Carmichael and a piece called Shiver, which we got a great response from our community. A piece about loss, and a number of different projects that went with that. And I would have to say that the conversations that happened in the foyer with that cast and the audience were, the approach to deeper was very much enshrined in that approach. That all of the people who came to see that show got a deeper response to that art form, contemporary dance. And the work there is The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, from Poles Park Theatre Company, and Kelly Aberg is here, the director of that piece. A disability work from our community. Activation. Again, Rick talked about that before. We're blessed with wonderful foyer spaces, but those wonderful foyer spaces are nothing if there are not people in them. And we're not doing our job with a public building if there aren't people in them throughout the day. So it can't just be for when you've got a show on at night. What you see there is Co3 Dance, part of this project, and there's a holiday dance program for upper primary, and they're dancing around this installation work by Gary Aitken, our gallery curator, a piece set in the forest. Build brand awareness, an obvious one for a strategic plan. And we've illustrated that with Tiny Dance, a piece that was created in Perth and that we presented during our Fringe World season 3 years ago, and was a way of taking the arts outside the building. And sustainability, of course, and really just illustrating the piece Saltbush, an Indigenous piece that was made between Italy and South Australia. And a phenomenal piece of work, fantastic. So on to our contemporary dance program. So why Mandurah and why contemporary dance? I think the first part of that is because Alison Pinder and I both have a passion for contemporary dance. And we thought we'd like to present it to our audiences. So we started with Sydney Dance Company and just kept on going. We, before we were approached by the Australia Council to apply for the program, the funding program, we'd been developing a reputation for presenting it. And we presented ADT, Bangarra, Sydney Dance Company, Dank Misic with Shiva, Amy Smith with her piece Wintering. And so we'd actually drawn some interest that we were actually presenting there. And of WA performing arts presenters, we were seen as the one that had the passion about contemporary dance. But for me, the pivotal moment was at ADT's G, our presentation of that, where we had 225 people in the audience in a house that holds 777. And of those, 205 of them were young people from contemporary dance departments of secondary schools. They just got it. It's not an easy piece to watch. It's relentless. Well, they just got it, and they jumped to their feet at the end and gave it a standing ovation. And then they mobbed the cast afterwards in the foyer. And I thought, well, there's something going on here. There's something going on here with a tiny little segment of our audience that we can do something with. So when Karen Mystery from OzCo asked us to apply for the program, that's what we focused on. We focused on focusing on that one particular audience segment and engaging a contemporary dance engagement officer. Mary Wolfler is the first person who took on that role, and she's in the front row, and start to really develop a program that meets that primary audience's needs. Of course, we had secondary audiences we were after as well, but that primary audience was our key focus. And then we also really felt that we also wanted to encourage dance practice in our community. So there's a whole bunch of other aims and objectives that are around that, including an integrated development program, given that we're only an hour from Perth by train. So engaging with independent dance artists from Perth to come to Mandurah and so on. So that's kind of where we really went. So then, because this happened in 2015-16, the Australia Council gave us $100,000 across 2 years. So, we needed money to achieve this. Half of that went towards a dance engagement officer. Mary fulfilled it first, and she went off on maternity leave, and Bernadette Lewis was the second person through a relationship with Co3 sorry. And so we really just got underway with that. I was really, I have to stop saying really, Mary's approach in the first place gave me great heart. Because what Mary did was she went out into the community and she went out and listened. And she talked and she listened. If you view audience development ultimately as a relationship building or exercise, then having an engagement officer who would go out and just listen is a great start. In talking to Annette Carmichael, who for me is the best person in community engagement in the country, she talks about loitering with intent. Great phrase, one to be repeated. It's very much a different spin on going out and listening. The exercise in audience development is about building a relationship with your audience and getting to know them. So on to the outcomes. Gary Stewart's Be Yourself is the photo. So these are the peak program performances that we presented over the 2 years. The Western Australian peak performances we presented over 2 years, including Cut the Sky, which is the image at the very beginning, from Marigeku. Some of the figures, the metrics. The 521% growth is a little illusory, but we just had more on. But they're great results. This is where the real work, I think, really happens for the future. The workshops and residencies, the artist talks, the Mooring residency program with 4 residencies offered, the work with our youth performance company, engaging with AusDance WA, with Parkinson's to do a Dance with Parkinson's program. You can see them there in our dance studio. The co-dance workshops, and working in with our local Binjarab community to create a dance troupe. It is worth noting, before I get into what do we really learn, that the second time we presented Sydney Dance Company's Countermove, we had 5 workshops in different schools from Perth to Mandurah. We had 650 people to the show, which is a phenomenal result for a regional so-called regional community with contemporary dance. We had 175 people to the pre-show artist talk, which is phenomenal. We had to shift it 3 times and put it in the auditorium because it was the only place we could actually hold it. And yeah, we had to stop half an hour before the show. So it was a phenomenal result. And that was moderated by Bernie. It was a great result for us. And I think that you can build audiences with a long-term approach to audience development. So what do we really learn? And here you see some of the work from Spare Parts in the making of Fox. Gorgeous little work. My favourite work of theirs of the last few years. The project finished in March 2017. It was meant to finish in December, but we kind of stretched it on a bit because we didn't appoint Mary until March 2 years before. How do you sustain this sort of engagement program within a box office focused business model? That's number one challenge. How do you find the funds? That we were able to get really good results, and we were seeing a long-term approach and response from our community. When the tap gets turned off and George Brandis gives away the money, how do you actually find a way to keep it ongoing? Don't have an answer to that, although I kind of do. But in 2017, we had no major dance programmed, and there was just one of those things that happened. I had intended to be presenting Frankenstein, and because of scheduling issues, that didn't happen. And it's a as a programmer, the slings and arrows of touring cycles can sometimes let you down, and you want to be consistent. So it was a great frustration to us. We did present Snake Sessions, Branch Nebula's piece over in Pinjarra as an outreach project. And with Moorings program, we worked with Sally's company Steamworks to Ghost She. And we also, a new work by Taffy Works. And later on, the solution to this came through the Regional Arts Partnership Program. We presented a workshop of Natalie Allen's A Night Out. So that started to come on stream towards the end of 2017. The drawbridge approach, what I call the drawbridge approach, is another thing to be aware of, is that if you're involved in engagement in an audience development program and that project finishes, you draw up that drawbridge. What are you going to do with the relationships that you've developed? What about those secondary school dance teachers who called us and say, what have you got in 2017? And you say, I'm sorry, we've got nothing. You've got to be aware of that approach. Consistency in terms of audience development is key. You have to carry on with the project to find some way to deliver. We had a year's gap. The marquee names, obviously Sydney Dance Company has a marquee name. We did so well with Countermove because it wasn't being presented in Perth. We are presenting Ab Intra this year. It is on at the State Theatre Centre. So the marquee names are key. So how do we then grow those audiences so they'll accept what we present to them of local work and WA work as being something that they want to see? And I don't have an answer to that. It's a work in progress. Annette Carmichael's comments recently struck a real chord. She managed a project called Future Landings for AusDance WA. And they did 10 versions of that in different regional communities all across WA, in 9 communities, twice in Denmark. And she said 10,000 people saw those 10 shows across the time frame, I think 5 years or so that Future Landings ran. But the real audience development work was the 450 or so regional dancers who took part in those 10 projects and then became the key advocate in those communities for contemporary dance. That's interesting. So instead of just looking at audiences, we need to think about developing local artists who will become our audiences, and think about the mutability between practitioner and patron. It's really important that we actually acknowledge that that's part of the issue here. It's not just about audience development, it's also around practitioner development. And we developed the program with that in mind, but we have to go further. We have to start creating work locally and then bringing those people into those shows. And conclusion that a well-structured creative development program can have significant audience development outcomes as long as the artistic development, the programming team and the marketing teams are working hand in hand, so that you're both working together on that. While audience development, from my view, is a program led activity, you have to be hand in hand with the marketing team. In many ways, you can see it as a cycle, another cycle that you have programming, then you analyse the program, see what sort of benefits you got out of it. Culture Counts is a good tool for that, but not the only one. The marketing team make use of that. And then you've got audience research. And that's thrown about what your audience wants, expects, desires, and that throws to the programming team. So you've got a virtuous cycle happening. Obviously moderated around curatorial kind of vision as well. So this leads us to where we've gone to next. So, obviously this started the application was done in the first place in 2014, but we're now on the next part of the journey, because the Regional Arts Partnership Program, we were part of a consortium led by the Ravensthorpe Community Arts Council, and us and AusDance WA and a couple of artists, including Annette from Albany and some others, and successfully pitched for $200,000, and we've got $50,000 over 2 years, and we've re-engaged Bernadette Lewis to actually carry on with this program. This photo of Rachel Ogle was taken as part of a night out, and we engaged with that as a Moorings residency to test how that show would work in a regional community. Gorgeous image, don't you think? Where we're going now, Bertie's meeting with me tomorrow to kind of outline her ideas as to where this program will go now, so it's still too kind of early. But our aims are very similar, although we've incorporated some of the learnings from the original program into this new part of the program. We're going to have to find the funds, the additional program funds that we actually put into that first one. But we are successfully finding that. And we are very confident this project will go on and continue to deliver audience development aims for the centre. So what have we got on offer? Avintra Sydney Dance Company. We've got The Beginnings of Nature, ADT, coming in August. We've got Cockfight, The Farm. We're also supporting our Binjarra Mob boys, and here they are performing in front of the inaugural Arts Awards that Culture and Arts WA ran at the State Theatre Centre October last year, or early November. And I think it's key that as part of our learning that we also commission a local dance work as part of this program. It's really important that we look after not just our Binjarra boys, but we also look after and encourage and foster a local dance scene in Mandurah as part of this program. It's key for us, and use the opportunities through the peak programs, the likes of Sydney Dance, ADT, to support and enable them to grow. It's a key part of the program. And in Foster, the community theatre model provides a very good model. The extended family come to those shows. So that's what you've got. And then if you can find a way to actually make sure that they link with the peak program you're bringing, you're starting to really work in that process. As Rick said I wrote it down here somewhere, of different, more, what's the other one? Deeper. Yeah, it's key. What we're also doing as part at the moment is we're working with Circuit West on a research project. Now that research project is to find out, obviously 8 years into the job, possibly coming a little late to the scene, but we have real issues with establishing an audience for drama. So we are researching our audience's desire to see theatre. And Stuart, the audience that came and saw The Lighthouse Girl the other night was phenomenal, but that's one that was out of the box, and coinciding with Anzac Day and with the local connections, I think was a really strong part of the success of that presentation. So it is quite interesting, some of the outcomes that have come out of that initial project. Now, Ellie's just got back from overseas, so hasn't had a chance to catch up with Sam in that project. But we're focusing on quite a different audience to the contemporary dance audience. Our contemporary dance primary audience we've identified as secondary school dance students. Now, our primary audience for theatre we've identified as women 45 plus. And we've identified that they are 1/3 working age, 1/3 retirement zone, and 1/3 post-retirement. They don't have kids any longer. They're either empty nesters or never had them in the first place. So they're not interested in family and children's theatre. Their top two activities are socialising and entertainment. Ballet and dance is the fifth top performance genre, so that's interesting. But what's also interesting, and it's the third top of what they don't want to attend. So there is a polarising there with contemporary dance. Well, that's not a surprise, is it? Because opera was also within the top things they didn't want to see. But they are within the top five. So we're really encouraged about this process that we're trying to unpick at the moment, is establish who that audience is, and the next stage of this process will be to focus group it and then set up a campaign strategy. And the spin-offs for our contemporary dance, establishing a secondary audience for our contemporary dance, I think are quite clear and key for us. So, in winding down, because drinks and questions and drinks, as I said, I view audience development to be not a marketing problem but a programming problem, but essentially that a virtuous cycle needs to be, a feedback cycle needs to be in place between the marketing team and the programming to ensure that you are delivering what your audiences needs. I need all the help I can get via this project and with my box office team and marketing team to get an understanding of what my audience's needs are. Not their wants, but their needs. What do you think the difference is between wants and needs? For me, it is expressed around the phrase and our purpose as a programmer to unite our community and make Mandurah a great place to live. Right? So I programmed Oedipus Schmiedipus, a piece you probably would only see in most places in a place like Pika, because of the community engagement potential of that show. So we had 85 people volunteer and see that show over 5 performances. And that was, for some of them, was one of the very best experiences they've ever had in their lives. You know, so it's gold, you know, to understand what our audience's needs are, and to program accordingly. Matty Bennell, who is the chap on the left, and is the 19-year-old who drives what was called Kongol Marawan Nuns, but is now being called Bibbulmun Korda, as he discovers where he comes from. I think he's still got a bit of a journey to go to. Mandurah would be a great place to live if he, as a 19-year-old Banjarab man, didn't have to struggle with his girlfriend to sort out his bond while living on Centrelink wage stipend. That if he was able to get on with finding out his culture, finding out where he really did come from, and interpreting it all through dance. Thank you.